The spire was a place where deals were made in whispers and broken with screams. Its clientele was a rogues gallery of the galactic community, bulbous, methane-breathing hulk of the quasi-sphere, their gelatinous forms quivering in their pressure suits. The crystalline creel, whose language was a series of sub-audible clicks that could shatter unshielded glass, and the sleek, feathered xylos, whose beauty often concealed a merciless cunning. In one corner, a trio of insectoid Cathar negotiated the price of a stolen star map, their mandibles clicking a frantic rhythm. The air, a carefully managed mix of nitrogen and trace elements, was thick with the scent of ozone, exotic spices, and the faint coppery tang of old blood. Into this den of calculated desperation, a door slid open, letting in a gust of gritty, recycled air from the docking ring. The figure that walked through was, by the standards of the spire, utterly unremarkable. It was a human. His name was Elias Vance, and he was a salvager, a profession so low on the galactic social ladder that it didn't even register. His ship, the Gravy Train, was held together with hope, duct tape, and the goodwill of loan sharks he was desperately trying to avoid. Elias was here to meet a contact, a Xylos named Corvix, who owed him a significant amount of currency for a haul of high-grade Durasteel. The deal was supposed to be simple. Walk in, get paid, walk out. He was tired. His environmental suit chafed at his neck, and his universal translator was on the fritz, making every alien conversation sound like a garbled radio broadcast punctuated by belches. He just wanted his money. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over the bar, the booths, the shadowy corners. He didn't see Corvix. He did, however, see a creel at the bar, its crystalline form shimmering with an agitated high-frequency vibration. A large, scarred hulk was looming over it, its pressure suit hissing with every labored breath. Their argument, translated by his flickering earpiece, was a rapid-fire exchange of insults and threats. "Your guarantee was worthless, you carbon-based splinter," the hulk gurgled. "My lineage has traded in information for 10,000 cycles, you walking air leak." The creel clicked back, its voice a painful screech in Elias's ear. This was none of Elias's business. He was here for one reason only. He shuffled past them, then keeping his head down, heading for a booth in the back where he could wait and try to get his translator to recalibrate. He sat down, his back to the wall, and ordered a synth-brew from a scuttling droid. He just wanted to be invisible. But invisibility was a luxury he couldn't afford. The argument at the bar escalated. The hulk, its patience eroded by a century of criminal enterprise, made a grab for the creel. The creel dodged, its crystalline body catching the dim light and refracting it into a blinding flash. In the ensuing confusion, the hulk overbalanced, its massive, suited form crashing backward. It stumbled, flailing, and its armored elbow slammed directly into the back of Elias Vance's head. Elias saw stars. His chair skidded and his synth-brew went flying. He turned, a hand going to the throbbing spot on his skull, and found himself staring at the hissing, faceplate-covered visage of the enraged hulk. But the creature didn't even acknowledge him. It was already pushing itself upright, its full attention back on the fleeing creel, which was now scurrying for the exit. "Out of the way, pink skin!" The hulk's suit speakers boomed, the translation a guttural roar in Elias's ear. This was the moment. Every other being in the spire, witness to 1,000 such altercations, knew the script. The lower life form, the human salvager, would apologize, cower, and get out of the way. And that was the natural order. Humans were tolerated because they were useful in menial roles, but they had no place, no standing. They were the quiet mice of the galaxy, skittering in the shadows of the true powers. Elias looked at the hulk. He saw the massive, suited form, the small, piggy eyes glaring at him through the thick visor. He saw the creel escaping. and he remembered that this whole mess was why he now had a pounding headache and no drink. He thought of Corvix, who was probably going to stiff him. He thought of the loan sharks on Titan who would break his legs if he didn't make a payment. He thought of the sheer, unadulterated exhaustion of a life spent being kicked around by the universe. The fear was there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was quickly buried under an avalanche of profound and absolute irritation. He didn't get up. He didn't apologize. He just stared back, rubbed his head, and spoke, his voice flat and tired. You owe me a drink." The spire went silent. Even the background hum of the environmental systems seemed to pause. The creel at the door stopped. The Xylos stopped their whispered deals. The Cathar's clicking ceased. Every sensory organ in the room was suddenly focused on the small, unarmored human who had just spoken to a Hulg crime boss as if he were a clumsy waiter. The Hulg stared, its simple mind struggling to process the data. This was an anomaly, an unquantifiable variable. "What?" it finally boomed. "My drink," Elias said, pointing to the spilled puddle on the floor. "You knocked it out of my hand. It cost 12 credits, and my head hurts. So that's extra." A wave of incredulity washed over the room. A Creel traitor, its form shimmering with barely suppressed mirth, let out a series of clicks that would have been laughter if it weren't so terrified. The Hulg's companions, 2 other hulking suits, moved in, or their massive hands clenching into fists the size of Elias's torso. The lead Hulg leaned down, its faceplate inches from Elias. "You are either very brave or very stupid, Pink Skin. Do you know who I am?" "No," Elias said honestly. "And I don't care. I'm not looking for trouble. I'm just here for a business meeting. But you hit me? You owe me an apology and a new drink." The Hulg straightened up and let out a gurgling sound that was the Hulg equivalent of a laugh, and it turned to its companions. "He wants an apology. The Pink Skin wants an apology." It turned back to Elias. "The only thing you're going to get is a one-way trip to the reprocessing vats." This was the point where any sensible creature would have run. But Elias was past sensible. The constant, grinding pressure of his life had fused his fear and frustration into a dense, immovable core of stubbornness. He had nothing to lose. His ship was a wreck. His bank account was empty, and his future was bleak. If he was going to get spaced by a Hulg thug, he was at least going to do it over a 12-credit drink. He stood up. It was a pointless gesture. He still only came up to the Hulg's mid-chest, but it felt right. "Look," he said, his voice calm. "I've had a really bad day. My translator is broken, my contact is a no-show, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose my ship. So you're right. I probably am stupid. But I'm also not in the mood. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Apologize, buy me a drink, and we can all go back to our miserable lives." The Hulg's response was a swift, brutal backhand that sent Elias flying across the room. He crashed into an empty table, the cheap alloy groaning under the impact. Pain exploded in his ribs. He tasted blood. The Hulg lumbered towards him, its companions chuckling. "See? Stupid. And weak. Like all your kind." Elias groaned, pushing himself up on his hands and knees, and he could hear the whispers starting again. Pathetic. A waste of oxygen. Should have known his place. The Hulg was almost on him, reaching down with a massive suited hand to grab him. And then, Elias's hand, scrabbling on the floor for purchase, touched something cold and metallic. It was a piece of the table he'd crashed into, a long, jagged shard of alloy, about a foot long and wickedly sharp at one end. It wasn't a weapon, not in any real sense. It was trash. But in his world, your trash was sometimes all you had. The Hulg's hand closed around his environmental suit, lifting him into the air. "Any last words, little mouse?" it gurgled, bringing him up to eye level. Elias didn't speak. He just looked the creature in the eye, and with a final, desperate surge of strength fueled by a lifetime of being overlooked, he drove the jagged piece of metal upwards with all his might. It wasn't a calculated strike. It was pure, unadulterated reflex. The shard, they aimed at the Hulk's thick neck, instead hit a far more vulnerable target, the flexible joint where the helmet connected to the suit's collar. The metal, honed to a razor edge by the impact that created it, punched through the environmental seals and buried itself deep into the soft, pulpy flesh beneath. The Hulk's gurgle turned into a choked, wet scream. Its grip on Elias loosened, and they both crashed to the floor. The creature thrashed, and its massive body convulsing as its methane-rich atmosphere hissed out into the nitrogen-oxygen mix of the spire. The hiss was loud, a death rattle that echoed in the stunned silence. Elias scrambled back, gasping for breath, his ribs screaming in protest. He watched as the Hulk's struggles grew weaker, its movements more spasmodic. Within 30 seconds, it was still. The massive, intimidating creature was dead, killed by a piece of junk in the hands of a man it had dismissed as a mouse. The silence in the spire was absolute. It was a vacuum, a void of sound that was more terrifying than any scream. Every being in the room was frozen, their various alien minds struggling to recalibrate their understanding of reality. The predator had become the prey in the span of a heartbeat. The unarmed had become lethal. The weak had proven to be anything but. The two other Hulks stared at their dead leader, then at the small, bloodied human. For a long, horrible moment, no one moved. Then, though Elias, his body trembling with adrenaline, did the only thing his salvager's brain could think of. He pointed a shaking finger at the two thugs. "One of you," he rasped, his voice raw, "owes me 12 credits." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the most perfectly, absurdly human thing he could have said. The two Hulk, their simple minds now completely overloaded, did not process it as a joke or a demand. They processed it as a threat. Their leader, a being of immense physical power, Meg had been neutralized in an instant by this small creature. If he could do that, what else could he do? Was this a trick? Was he some kind of undercover assassin? The uncertainty, the complete and total failure of their predator-prey model was paralyzing. From the back of the room, a creel, its form vibrating with a new, sharper frequency, let out a series of clicks. The translator in Elias's ear, flickering back to life, spat out a rough interpretation. Unpredictable. Why extreme violence over minimal provocation. Defensive capabilities underestimated. Another voice, a Xylos trader, whispered to its companion, its feathers ruffled. "Did you see that? No weapon, no armor. He used the environment. He used a piece of rubbish. A Hulk. They're berserkers. And he just stopped it." The narrative was shifting. The whispers were no longer about his weakness, but about his terrifying, incomprehensible strength. They hadn't seen a man defend himself, and they had seen a creature of unknown capabilities dispatch a known apex predator with a piece of debris. They had seen a human. The two Hulk thugs, after a long, tense moment, made a decision. They didn't attack. They turned, and with a final, terrified glance at Elias, they lumbered out of the spire, abandoning their leader's body. The door hissed shut behind them, and the tension in the room broke, replaced by a low, excited hum of speculation. Elias just stood there, shaking, covered in the Hulk's fluids, the blood from his own cut lip trickling down his chin. He didn't feel like a badass. He felt sick. He looked at the dead alien, a creature he had just killed, and a wave of nausea washed over him. But before he could process it, a figure glided up to him. It was Korvix, his contact, looking at him with wide avian eyes that held a mixture of awe and terror. He was holding a data slate. "Mr. Vance," Korvix said, his voice unusually formal and respectful. I have your payment, with interest. And please, allow me to cover your bar tab for your trouble." Elias looked at him, then at the slate, then back at the body on the floor. He took the slate, his hand still trembling. The balance was 3 times what he was owed. He looked at Corvix, who flinched under his gaze. "The drink was 12 credits, Elias said, his voice hollow. Corvix nodded rapidly. Of course, and a very large bonus for your time." Elias didn't argue, and he pocketed the slate, turned, and walked out of the spire, leaving the body, the whispers, and the shattered assumptions of 100 aliens behind him. He walked back to the gravy train, his footsteps echoing in the empty docking bay. He sealed the airlock, slumped into his pilot's chair, and just sat there, staring at the void of space. He had just rewritten the local rules of engagement, not through superior technology or political maneuvering or military might. He had done it by being tired, broke, and monumentally irritated over a spilled drink. And in the process, he had given the galaxy a new data point on humanity. A terrifying, unpredictable, and unforgettable one. One man, walking into the wrong saloon, had become the proof of concept for a species they had so carelessly underestimated. And he just wanted his 12 credits back.